created my own little algorithms to do one thing or another, like disease states, a mortality algorithm. And
I think you will have a whole levels of robotics, like humanoid robots or non-humanoid robots, whatever the case is.
But the one that I really gravitated towards was Alteryx. Low code, no code, business intelligence stuff, data science, machine learning, things like that.
Audio, the text, and then there's big metaverse bug. Everybody knows the metaverse.
Another week of AI.
All right, live.
All right, let's go. Welcome back to the III podcast. With this episode, we're going to talk about semiconductor chips, those tiny brains inside electronics, and AI agents, your digital assistants. So we have amazing people on today, Keyshawn and Dr. Drew, along with Asif and Lucky. Let's get into it, y'all.
If we have to start, first of all, we got to start with why we're here, right? Then slowly we're going to get into how and what, somebody like Masako is the reason we're here, right? Because we are all advocating for something that we believe in. Masako has her, passion behind a few things that she represents. We all have our own passions. We all have our own cause in life that we say, you know what? There's so many things in life we can do, but let's get together on a podcast and tell the whole world about it. Why not, right? So thank you all for joining. This really is an exciting opportunity to continue the same conversations that we've been having, I guess, 78 episodes ago, where we're talking about people, process, and technology, right? We want to identify the people, let them know who they are, figure out what sort of process they need, and how technology serves them very, very well, right, through that process. So this piece of people, process, and technology is an age-old problem. But as you can tell with AI, with semiconductor chips, with the way we are able to develop software, it's taken off, right? It's taken off. This process is continuously shifting, but people on one hand is not really shifting with it. And that's a age-old problem we always had. People, process, technology, process moves rapidly, technology moves with it, but people have to have some time to pick up and catch up with it. And this is how it starts. It starts with the conversation. It starts with some awareness, some education. And if we have to identify a few things about what needs to be what needs to become education for people, it's the hardware, software, and data. Easy as that. If you don't know enough about hardware, we got somebody here talking about hardware. And if you want to know something specifically about data, we got somebody here about data, right? And of course, Lucky, the cybersecurity guru, is here as well. We're going to cover multiple angles, multiple aspects. And today, I'm just super thrilled to introduce my good friend Keyshawn, who's been a mentor, like kind of like a North Star, right? And tell me like, hey, go here, right? And not for me only, he does it for a whole community called Dallas, right? Dallas Bunker Labs. A lot of military veterans have been through Dallas Bunker Labs, and he mentored many of us, right? And I would say 5 years ago, he was that one person kind of said, we're going to have Dallas Bunker Labs, and we're going to help as many entrepreneurs as possible. And through that, I'm one of the entrepreneurs that said, you know what? I can do this. With people like Keyshawn, anything is possible, right? So Keyshawn, sir, welcome to II podcast.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here with such astounding individuals. I know I'm going to learn a lot from you all today. So I got my pen and notepad ready, and let's get into it.
Well, you're going to get started, but before you get started, sir, you got to hear the chants, because we don't call it II podcast we call it II podcast for obvious reasons. And Lucky is the reason for it. So Lucky, how you feeling, brother? How's your vocal course doing?
I'm feeling great. I'm feeling even better now that we have this group together, and it makes me feel like but really, building on what you guys have already covered, there's a lot of reasons why we should use AI and how we can benefit from it. So a lot of people just don't know, what AI. They just think, well, just get me that AI, and then we'll be okay. But we'll cover, what is really necessary and what's realistic. So thank you all for being here today, and we can help paint that picture. So welcome.
Yeah, absolutely. And we also have Dr. Drew Minkin with us, right? Returning champion. Last time we had this discussion, it was a heavy knowledge sharing, right? A lot of in-depth understanding of what it is that we need to know. But this is what we do in this podcast. We invite everybody in and have them learn something new. And this is a learning session, I would say. So, Dr. Drew, I know you have a specific chant to go with, but welcome back, sir. And I'm looking forward to that chant.
All right. Well, I'll give it a try. I mean, I got to do it I got to do it my way because Lucky's hard to keep up with. But there we go.
There you go.
That's a lot of tea right there to keep that going. Basako, you're not excluded, and Keyshawn, you're not excluded either. You're welcome to give it a shot.
I think that's all I get.
I got that late day vocal coffee. Now we can get going.
Now we can keep going.
If I wanted to be more like my Jewish ancestors to my father's side, it'd be ay.
And now we have Bobby with us as well.
Hey everybody, how y'all doing today?
Bobby?
Hey, Bobby Ray.
Good to see you.
Bobby said, "I'm not gonna miss my I chant today. I'm gonna join right on time."
Right.
Hit it, Bobby Ray. Give us your
Come on, Bobby, hit it one time, please.
Hey.
There you go.
All right.
We're all in now.
Yeah, this is a full house. I'm glad that everybody's here now, and we can get started with everything we need to talk about to anybody who's listening, right? But we definitely want to talk about something in an early stage to set the stage for what the rest of the conversation will look like. Because none of this conversation will happen without the hardware. And that's the most hidden aspect of all the discussions around artificial intelligence is the hardware. Once people find out about the intricacies of this hardware, the infrastructure behind it, it's just important that we all get to see the familiarity of how these hardwares are placed and how they work and what do we need to know about them. So, Keyshawn, brother, I really want to hear everything you have to say about the hardware and some more, but give us some high level, maybe a 10,000 foot view of what it is that you see and what it is that you think we should know about.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to give the audience a little bit more background context about me. So I've been working in the AI space at a large technology company for about the last 6 years. And half of my tenure there, I've been working specifically in data centers. So building out data centers, installing H100 chips, and doing AI. I think one of the biggest challenges we have today is, when people think AI, they just think software. And kind of in my world, it's kind of saying like, how do you move up the stack, right? So you have the actual physical hardware. Then on the hardware, you have some type of software that sits on top. And then whatever sits on top of the software is where you truly start to see like the AI agents, the LLMs, all the intricacies of what we call AI. But if we move down the stack to the actual base of it, it all starts with infrastructure. So to any veteran that's out there, any individuals that's looking to move in the space, I truly feel there's a huge opportunity what's currently happening in the market right now. And so if we look at a data center, right, because I think that's most people be like, well, where does all of this hardware sit, right? So where do these AI agents that, live in this weird ether that, we never see, we never touch outside of a computer screen, like where is all of that happening? All that happens at a data center. So you have different activities that can happen. You have on-prem. Some companies have their own physical infrastructure physically on their site. And then you have cloud. So the space I worked in is in the cloud space. So cloud GPUs. And what happens at a data center is essentially this. I like to say from dirt to GPU. When you're building out the data center, things you have to consider is power and cooling. These machines run extremely hot. So think like your car, right? You're never going to take your car to the Sahara Desert, take all the coolant out the engine and just run it as hard as you can. The engine's going to die almost instantly. So with these GPUs that you have in data centers, you have to have some type of cooling mechanism to take the heat off of the chipset and kind of recycle it through the machine. A lot of data centers that we're seeing in today are moving to more eco-friendly, where they're actually repurposing a lot of the heat that comes off the GPU chipset. So there are systems whereby you can capture that heat and actually repurpose it within the building itself. So I worked at a data center in Canada where they were actually repurposing some of that heat back into the building that were coming off of the GPU chipsets. And then within the actual data center itself, you also have power, right? So think of your home. Your home is connected to an electricity grid. That electricity grid is connected to like a major substation that's kind of providing your community power. So think of that exact same concept at a data center. When the power comes into the data center, it goes through this mythical transformer that helps kind of convert the power down to think like clean energy so it can actually go to the GPU racks. When it gets to the GPU racks, all that power is then broken up to each of the different servers, right? So on the servers, you have what's called rear door heat exchangers. I know that sounds like a big fancy word. It's just a big word to say a big air condition. So when you have all this power going in, you have all this heat being generated, you have to have a way to kind of pull off that heat off of the chipsets. So you have what's called a rear door heat exchange. And it looks exactly like it sounds. There's a big door that has a bunch of cooling fans, and you put it on the back of a rack where all your different servers or your physical infrastructure sits on. And that helps also pull some of the air out or some of the hot air out. So there's two types of chipsets that you have. You have liquid cooled, which basically means you have this special type of water that passes through the machines to help keep the chips cool. And you have air cooled. Air cooled essentially means that the room itself is at a cold temperature. And it's basically using like a big air condition to help keep all the machines cool and running. Within that, you have your CPUs, which if you know even the basics about computers, you have your processing units that sits on the actual chips. You also have like storage. So if you think about your phone, you have all your photos saved somewhere. So each of these different servers have storage. They have CPUs. They have the GPUs that sit on there, which makes the physical infrastructure itself. Now, once you have the physical infrastructure, you have to connect it all, right? So how do you best talk to each other? There's cables, thousands and thousands of cables in a data center. So you can have all these isolated components, but if they can't talk to each other, it does it no good. So we have thousands of cables that are going back and forth. Think like spaghetti noodles that are connecting each of these machines together so that they can speak one language. Now, we talked about moving up and down the stack. So once you have the physical infrastructure, you have the software that sits on top of it. And then you have the internet that kind of comes into it to say, hey, how do you access Netflix, right? You got to have the internet. So if you want to go download a movie, you're connecting to a data center somewhere in the world that is processing that information so that you can have kind of access to it. So I know I was kind of hodgepodge, kind of like all over the place, trying to give you like everything I know of a data dump in like 65 seconds, but I'm happy to peel the onion in any of those directions.
Yeah, I mean, this is where the peeling the onion starts right here, right? Because what you mentioned, if people don't see how that makes the whole globe work, right, they're not going to get interested, because this is just off of that sort of an importance that we have these sort of knowledge and these sort of infrastructure to be a global lead in whatever. Innovation, national security, whatever you can think of, it's all related to these bare metal boxes that we're discussing, right? And if you go dive deeper and deeper into it, it's not about just, I love coding, that's why I'm in IT space. No. This is beyond coding. This is science. This is atomic level deposition where 15 atoms side by side creates a gate, and through that gate travels these electricity, the volt that he's talking about. And if you want to dive deep into it, it's like Lego. Yep. If you don't have all your Lego pieces together, no data will flow. And if the data doesn't flow, there is no pickup, there is no drop off. And Keyshawn mentioned it very articulately with the fan, how that fan has to keep the heat out, keep the machine cool. So that way the system is not frying itself. Because we all know what happens when a Samsung phone and its battery blows up. You don't get to fly no more. PPA, it's the terminology that I will highly recommend everybody Google it and see how PPA plays out, which is performance, power, and area. And if you look at this area, since 1950s, when we had the first AI, that processing area with performance of it has been shrinking tremendously. So when we're talking about shrinking something that you can see, all of a sudden you don't see anymore, because it's a size of about 15 atoms sitting side by side. Atoms. I'm talking about like things that people cannot even put microscope on. That's how small it is, because once you go atom less, you end up in a quantum space. And of course, we all know about quantum computing. So here's my challenge to anybody and everybody who's listening. Do the research and see where it is that you fit in, because you do not have to be an IT person. You can be that guy who loves to work in cars, go under the hood, and break the engines apart and put them together. And if you want to do it more of that, but with some atomic level depositions, you want to start looking into semiconductor chips and, of course, these hardwares that Keyshawn just mentioned very, very well. So I guess here's my next question to you, Keyshawn, because we are talking about jobs and how job market is changing, how the employment is changing. Because if I speak on it, I speak on it usually from the perspective of manufacturing chips in Texas, manufacturing chips in our neighborhood, literally in our neighborhood, because Austin, Sherman, all these areas is where the fabs are. That's where they manufacture chips. But as far as data center goes, that's a whole nother job that we have to discover, because, okay, yeah, you got semiconductor chips manufacturing, but these chips will end up in the data center. The reason they're manufacturing them is to have them in the data centers, these GPUs and CPUs. So walk us through like these maybe not necessarily just job, but the business opportunities that's out there, because there's a whole lot of services that shifts the whole supply chain from the global to within few cities within Texas.
Yeah,
and all these are shifting.
Yeah, absolutely. You stated very well. Like there's an entire ecosystem that happens when it comes to AI. There's the physical, there's the raw material to build the chips, right? And then if you travel further down the ecosystem, then there's the physical data center. I think anytime you open your phone to Yahoo or Google News, there's always a story of AI. Facebook is building another $6 billion of data centers in Minnesota, right? Cold climates are ideally the best, just FYI. Or you'll see Google is building a data center in South Texas, or, Twitter is building one in XYZ. Like there is not enough data center capacity. And when I say capacity, that means like there's not enough physical infrastructure of buildings for racks to actually go sit in. So if I was a veteran and I'm like, hey, how can I leverage this and leverage my skill set? Let you all know, I do not have an engineering background. I'm great at project management. I'm a PMO. And so I stepped into the AI space, leveraging my PMO project managing skills. And I learned AI from the ground floor, literally plugging in cables into the back of servers, opening them up, changing out GPUs, CPUs, all that things. So if you do not feel as comfortable in the coding world, there's an entire another world where you can still be involved. And that's helping building out this capacity in the data center. So even if you got a trade as an electrician or a plumber, I am telling you right now, there is not enough of these individuals at data centers, and they are making money hand over fist. So if you wanted to start a business as a subcontractor for plumbing, electrician, security, there's not enough of these specialties out there to where there's a few players in the market that are repeat customers because they just know how to churn. They know the faucet's open and they're going to take as much water from it as they potentially can. And the more cups that come in, the better competition there is, the better pricing will be. But there is a huge market opportunity out there for that.
Yeah, you mentioned that. Can you guys hear me okay? Yeah, and it's really hot in the news, what it takes to build an AI. Like recently, you've seen a lot of with XAI and Grok, right?
Yeah.
What it took to build the facility in Memphis. And do you have any insight on, the power and what it took to bring up something like that?
Yeah. So let's just think about like for 2,048 GPUs. So if we break it down to a level lower, each server, right, they consider it a box. Each of them typically have 8 GPUs within them. I think recently at I think it's NVIDIA's GTC, they just talked about, this new NVL 72 system where it's basically 72 GPU racks. That's a whole nother podcast conversation to talk about NVIDIA. But yeah, so to get that to come together, okay, I lost my train of thought thinking about NVL 72s because I was like, man, that's a rabbit. Well, repeat your question one more time, Lucky, so I can get back to it.
Just with Grok, XAI, the facility itself, it required, I don't know how many megawatts and the facility itself, what it would take to grow a facility like that now, because people just see Grok, right? They just see Grok, XAI, and then Grok's fantastic, from depending on who you ask. But to power and build a facility like that from ground up, I mean, there's what kind of insight do you have on things of that nature? Because for me, I'm on the application layer, and I don't really know, but you just hear in the news what type of a lift that was to do, and they did it in weeks and days.
Yeah, so typical deployment, I would say for a data center, right? We're talking about a data center, you're looking about a 12 to 16 month build, right? Whoever they contracted with built it faster. And then the second half of that is deploying the physical systems. I think they deploy like 100,000 GPUs. That industry average, you're looking at 6 to 12 months to deploy that much. I think they did it in like 100 days. So there was, I believe, like 1,000 of workers working 24-hour shifts overnight to pull that together. That's just not Twitter or X doing this. There's other companies that are doing this exact same thing where they're running 24/7 around the clock. Because right now it's kind of like the race to the moon. The faster, cost is not relevant to these individuals because there's billions and billions of dollars of cash and capex to throw at it. But the faster to the market is the people who will win. And I think that's why you're starting to see this race heat up between countries of who's going to be the dominant player and leader in AI.
Wow. Well, Bobby and Drew, what are your thoughts on hardware? Because we see it from, say, a brick and mortar kind of scenario, but closer you are to the data center, your experience changes a little bit, right? Depending on what it is that you're doing, and given your background, data latency is a huge problem that you guys are trying to solve. So, what are you guys' thought on what do you think about the hardware and the data side of things and the experiences that you guys have?
I'll defer to Drew.
Drew, you want to go?
Sure. Well, I mean, I'm gonna make some general statements related to what I'm seeing from I mostly work in the cloud neutral analytics data space that the Databricks works in, and you can. The short story is that the LLM revolution that's happening is probably still the most popular because the work that goes into building deep learning, it's not that it's not relevant, it's that there's been, I would say, kind of a plateau in innovation in what can be done. There's been a lot of work that comes out of that, but right now, being able to use large language models to be able to build AI agents to be able to take over tasks that either used to have humans or are doing things that humans can't do is kind of the next undiscovered country. And so, that's the hard part is that there's a spectrum of how much GPUs are needed in that in that work, because if you're lucky, you can do shortcuts to not have to use GPUs. But there's a lot of things that if you're building really big models like a Grok or like an XAI, where you need to have these types of infrastructure. So I'm going to stop there because I don't want to get too far down. So just wanted to say that.
Well, that's good. That's really, really, really insightful. I really appreciate that. From my experience, not only is everything really true, I think most people don't understand, again, the opportunity that's here when you learn basically the hardware piece of it. What we know is things happen and humans can only accept so much change, right? So when you talk about data centers and the types of processors, it's not the bleeding edge of what's possible. It is a new plateau as from a industry standpoint of how business models in that chip design world is going to operate. And for me, I learned that lesson early in my career. I used to work for a company called DEC. It's not here anymore. But DEC, now HP, part of HP, we had a chip called the Alpha chip, which was a RISC chip, and Intel was stuck in x86 land. Long story short, some people from DEC were hired on to Intel, and then that's when they came out with Xeon chips. But bottom line is when we looked at the chip, we was like, this is our stuff in here. Huge court case, and you think we're going to win. It's a slam dunk, and something like they didn't even change some stuff. And the judge rendered a landmark decision. He said, yes, they stole it flat out. That's what they did. And you are entitled to some type of compensation. But if I make Intel cease and desist making the chips that now are such a part of business in the world, I will break an industry, and we don't want to break an industry. So right now, if you take the opportunity to learn the latest of what's out there, variants of that will be around for a while. So it's not like you're learning something. With software, you learn it. Next version, you relearning it. Coding, with coding, you learn a language. I'm tired of learning languages, right? So I was glad with this latest iteration that it's low code, no code. But with the hardware, you got variations of whatever is out there. But as far as a huge leap forward, we've just had a huge leap. So if you learn what's out there, if you're not very tech savvy, or as he said earlier, if you don't like coding, but you do like earning money in the tech field, I think learning about the various hardwares that are out there and getting into that field and seizing that business opportunity will give you a strong financial foundation to then kind of get on the train and be on the what's next. But so much infrastructure has been built out with the current iteration of technology, they're not going to just dump that. So you have something that's not just relevant today from a sustainment standpoint, and then has to be maintained. All of the things, just like your car, you buy a great car, but you better have a great warranty, because without that great warranty, you will regret buying that great car. Are you that person who understands the technology, understands average mean time to failure, and what does that mean? What kind of things you need to keep on stock? Who do you need to partner with? I think it's a great opportunity for anyone who literally wants to get into the tech field without being super techy and without the technology kind of shifting under their feet super rapidly. What we found out already was great hardware, great software for models, and then a new software came out and said, I could do the same thing with less. Well, businesses like to make more money with less resources. Sounds like a winning kind of plan to me. What are y'all thoughts?
I'm going to give it back to Masako because she started this whole fire here. But I think Masako has a mission that speaks to what has never changed. And I think this is another piece of the conversation that everybody should take away with, is that no matter how you see things in the world that is shifting, the sand that's always moving, one thing that hasn't changed ever is data. And I challenge myself to say that, right? Because the data will always be here. It's just that one data that you never captured and the data that you did capture. That's the only data that's changing, right? If you haven't caught it, it's gone. But one that you caught it, it's there with you now. It's up to you to do what you're going to do with that data. So me and Masako was talking about like data at rest, data in motion, data in use, which means that these three states of data will never change. It's where you fit into that three pieces of data is where you're going to either find the AI hype or the semiconductor chips hype. And that will tell you what part of the spectrum you're in. Because if you're on that AI hype that everybody's talking about today in this, ever shifting user interface versus that AI that's happening on the chip side of things, right? But they all stay the same as long as they're data. So Masako has this great ambition of doing data literacy, and I'm going to talk. I'm gonna have Masako describe that data literacy program because I think no matter who you are, you just need to have some data literacy, and you will feel like cool as a cucumber after that. Because otherwise, these stuff hits you up, man. This stuff is like so confusing, so much power draining. But hey, take it from data literacy. You will see the value in that. What do you say, Masako?
I absolutely agree with you, Asif. Data literacy, everything is data, right? And, my mission is speaking to the individuals that feel like they may be left out, that they don't understand what is happening in this tech space with semiconductors and AI. Here's the thing, though. You have to be at a state of curiosity for you to look deeper into what is next. What is my best next step in order for me to have success in this world? Because when it comes to data literacy, if you're not understanding where you are and what data means to you, everything about yourself, what is unique to you and your household, then you're not going to see that. It's so easy to just ask, okay, what are my best next steps to understand what is happening in this current climate? And if you are looking to continue to live in this current climate and you want to eat and you want to be a part of the have-mores versus just the haves, you have got to get curious about semiconductors and AI, because it's like the brain and the heart and the muscles. They go together. You cannot have one without the other. And you just have to have a hunger and show up and just ask, okay, what is next? Where do I fit in this space?
Right.
Where can I go tomorrow in order to have longevity, to have a career and continue to thrive? Because if you don't, you're going to get left behind. And I always relate things to movies. And when I think about our current climate and I think about movies, I think about, you guys remember the Terminator? How the Terminator, they have the semiconductor chips within the Terminator, and that's how they're processing the information, and that's how they're moving extremely quick. And it's just like they're always on to the next thing before you could even fire your synapses to think about what you're going to do next. And so I think as a person with blood flowing through your veins, you do not want to be the person that's left behind where you cannot even participate in the conversation. So it starts with data. What data do you need to know? You first need to know yourself, and then you need to get training, because you're going to find success when you leverage the knowledge that you have and you exchange your knowledge by placing value on that versus exchanging your time, because people don't place value on the time that you have. They place value on the knowledge that you leverage. That's my thoughts on it.
Yeah. And this all brings it to the same aspect that no matter how you want to engage anything that's happening today, if you don't have the data-driven decision mind, you have to start practicing, right? So, a lot of people say, like, I'm learning about data. I say you're learning to deploy data in the correct setting with the correct sort of data sets. It's all about data. So if you don't have that data mindset, you're going to fall for things that are presented to you using data, and you're going to use the data set that you don't use to make decisions on those bad data. And that is not necessarily just 5 years of events. This has happened for generations and decades and thousands of years, where we've been presented the wrong set of data, and that's how we made decisions based on the data that we didn't think we need, and we never deployed it. So I get really passionate discussing these topics because, as you can see, everybody here is talking about data. And we're talking about large language model, we're talking about cybersecurity, protecting those data, processing those data, architecturing those data, teaching about those data, right? And that's important because data is not something that we can just ignore as techie stuff anymore, right? data is literally part of our way of living today, because we're presented with so much data in a digital means, news cycle, movies. And, here, me, Lucky, and Bobby, we just love talking about movies. Oh, so many movies.
Well, the funny thing is just life imitates art. And if you don't get on board and get familiar with AI, it's going to catch you by surprise, kind of like Skynet did on Terminator. You got to be ready for the Terminators. You got to know where the off switch is. So in order to, and realistically, life does imitate art. And there's a lot of books, there's a lot of movies written, have been produced on artificial intelligence. And what our best way is just to prepare, understand what AI is and what it isn't. So we're not building that monster in our head to say AI is going to, come out of the closet and then take me out because I have something to do with AI in the future. And so if anything, start to figure out, where you fit. If it isn't designing AI models, we hit it right on the head earlier. There's a lot of, blue collar people that are out there that would benefit with working with AI. The electricians, that's something I would love to get into. Plumbing, what it takes to build a data center. There's a lot of moving parts there, not just AI is going to replace people. And I think we need to get rid of that stigma. It's more of a tool. Yes, there's a lot of functionality there that can help us do our jobs better, but we have to prepare ourselves. And what do we do? How do we do that? Do you like to work with your hands? Do you like to work with your mind? At the end, everyone has a piece of this AI, this new future in AI.
You know what, Lucky, I want to piggyback on you because you said the monster in the machine. Mm-hmm. If you do not participate and you come to leverage the knowledge that you have and sharpen your skill set on AI, then fast forward, you will find a monster in the machine, because what you'll find is more biased data and you will be excluded.
Mm-hmm.
So history will repeat itself in such a heinous way that you're not even included in the landscape of what is happening. Could you imagine not being included? Like, you'll be wiped off the face of the earth. You will not even have a legacy to continue. You'll say, oh my goodness, I remember when, but you won't be a part of it. So that alone is reason for you to just like, I got to be curious about this. I have to become one with this, because without you and your input, then you're written off.
Yeah, I have a few thoughts I want to share on that, just kind of facing that what feels like an infinite learning curve. And the reality is that it's overwhelming if you feel like you have to understand 100% of anything, right? And you have to grow from where you are. And if there's one thing that I can say has helped me, most people are surprised when I mentioned that I was, a C average history of religions major that fell into being a data scientist, right? Because it doesn't seem to match, right? Why would you be such a fuzzy thing and then begin the second thing? And, liking complexity is something, and getting used to things being difficult is an important mindset, I would say. Like I did a presentation at Nike a few months ago where I had Sisyphus, rolling up the hill and back down again, saying, world champion long distance runner, right? Because if all you're worried about is getting to a certain point, there's always going to be another point to get to and another point, right? And when it comes to learning AI or learning anything when it comes to data, right, there's still a lot of just data engineered jobs to either help get things ready to be churned into chip work for, fine tuning or building models from scratch, or on the other side of the spectrum, being able to stitch together a broad application that uses AI. So, the important part is to get used to being confused and get used to just getting better all the time, because it's always going to change. And the more that you're used to that it's going to change, the more you're going to be prepared for the bottom to drop out on one thing as another thing comes up, right? I started with SQL, what is it, like 27 years ago, right? But things have come and gone that have been interesting as other languages. But it's still around. But I've had to broaden just having that one thing and knowing that there's not just one ticket, I think is a key part along those lines. So anyway, just wanted to share that piece there. And so
Yeah.
another thing that I just want to talk about real quick, that made me think about, Masako's vision, as being able to empower parents, is that I think when you look at the base, you have to be able to go to models like ChatGPT, DeepSeek, others, and be able to be ready to consider that it's a child that you want to teach you the way you want to be taught, right? Prompt engineering itself is an act of parenting, right? Don't do this, do that, be more specific in here, forget about these types of things. And then you will start getting responses that are tailored for you. And that way you don't feel like you got to fit the information to, you don't have to fit your brain to the information. You can try to get it to fit to you to make it more sense. And once you start getting the lay of the land, you can start building things more from there. So anyway, just wanted to add those pieces.
No, I mean, this is a great segue into what we will get into next is, Dr. Drew's subject matter expertise. But let's set the stage before we move into all things AI. Maybe Keyshawn and everybody here can lead us into that discussion about how it is that you, and specifically Keyshawn, you mentioned that PMO, right? How it is that you are using AI. I mean, just give us a kind of as much comfortable you are with sharing that information, because there's a lot of these AI use cases that we're just like, I don't talk about it much. But if you can give us some glimpse into like how is AI changing what it is that you do on your life.
Yeah, I think and it kind of talk about what Masako was talking about, the AI agents, right? I think AI is a tool, right? And it's no different than whether you choose a hammer or a screwdriver. Right. At the end of the day, you can almost accomplish the same thing, but one's going to be a little bit more efficient for what you need to do. And I also want to touch on Dr. Drew's comments about kind of the data and, the learning models, because there was something that Elon had stated, about, rewriting and retraining the data models to take a lot of junk out and rewrite the entire human knowledge, XYZ. And like Masako said, like, that's scary. Right. These are my thoughts, my opinions, and not that of I. These are just Keyshawn's thoughts. But I think there should be a open source data, kind of a data lake model for training AI, because to our points earlier, there's going to be a lot of biases on what goes in and what shouldn't. And there's a lot of history that some people may agree to and some people may disagree with. And we don't want our human bias to train a model, and exclude parts of history, XYZ. And when you're looking for something, the data doesn't come back as accurate that we know it to be true. So hopefully that's something we can touch on in the future, on how do we keep the integrity of data when we're working on these great, data sets that these companies are putting out, whether it's ChatGPT, Gemini, Azure, or Elon's X thing. But for me, in using AI, it definitely helps with efficiency. It's almost like being able to talk to a consultant for free and at any time of the day without paying $600 an hour just to get some feedback. I think it's great, but I don't think AI is truly going to replace that human interaction with consultancy, because one thing AI can't give you is that imperialism that we all have of how does it actually work in the real world. You can't put the behavioral inflections on a conversation you had with your CEO or with a client into an AI chat and ask the AI to say, hey, interpret this human inflection point for me. Like, there's sensories that we have as humans that you just can't get out of AI. So when people think like AI is just going to completely, take away all, the white collar entry level jobs, I don't think that's true. I think it's going to force a lot more efficiency, instead of having to, pay someone to spend time on doing a PowerPoint for, 3 days. They can leverage AI to help build that PowerPoint in, 2 hours, and then they can move up the value stack in the company. So it's like, how can they leverage, AI to help automate? Even within my team, I completely encourage them to use AI. It's how do we move efficient, as people, so we can add and contribute back to the GDP. I'm not the one. I grew up old school where I had to build PowerPoint decks from scratch. Like there was no AI when I was building PowerPoint decks for my leaders. So everything was kind of like, how do I see it? What's my experience, you know? But with my team, it's like, why would I tell you to take 6 hours to build something that something can do it for you and you can go in and add your flavor to it? So that's how typically I like to use AI. If there's a lot of context within a body description, or if I want to quickly kind of grab some highlights out of a white paper, because I'm crunched on time, I would love to leverage AI to say, hey, give me some summary points from this, you know, cite it. And then I can always go back and do my due diligence and, you know, and double check and read it. But I think AI is a great augmented kind of an assistant to help you, you know, condense your lifestyle into, you know, 1 hour instead of 6 days for things. So my thoughts, not of that of AI is not going to replace your job. I know you hear it on the news. It sounds big, bad, and scary. But for those who lean into it, it can be very lucrative for you because it frees you up to move up the value chain and adding value back to whether it's your business or back to the company that you may work for.
Yeah, well put. And before we take that and, you know, ask Dr. Drew on his input on how we need to educate ourselves about AI, one of the things that I want to do is talk about smart AI community and our partner Pine AI. Pine AI is a program put together by deeplearning.ai for the specific purposes of bringing data literacy up front in people's mind. Deeplearning.ai was established by Andrew Ng. And Andrew Ng is the former founder CEO of Coursera, where you can go and educate yourself about many topics, including data literacy. And if you're interested in data literacy for AI, you can go to deeplearning.ai. And from deeplearning.ai, you can get many of these topics that we're discussing either for free or just few dollars, I would say. That's worth it, right? And if you're challenged to say like, hey, look, I'm not going to go to deeplearning.ai because everything I learn is on YouTube. I'm one of those guys that learn everything from YouTube. You go to youtube.com and look up deeplearning.ai. There's plenty of courses, and any specific tools that you're seeing and you think it's a big hit on AI, go to deeplearning.ai. They probably have that company coming and teaching about that product using deeplearning.ai, which I love. So before I do get into Dr. Drew's opinion on these topics of AI tools, let's play a short clip about Andrew Ng speaking on Pine AI event. All right, give me a second. I'm going to play this off here.
Hello, deep learners. I'm Andrew Ng, founder
Yeah, seems to be
of deeplearning.ai, and I'm excited to welcome you to our global deep learning community. I know that many of you are here today because you want to bring.
Give me a second. I'm going to refresh this so we can play it again. Sorry about that. Here we go.
Hello, deep learners. I'm Andrew Ng, founder of deeplearning.ai, and I'm excited to welcome you to our global deep learning community. I know that many of you are here today because you want to break into AI and build your career. I hope that being part of this community will help you to do so. To give you a proper welcome, I'd like to show you around the deeplearning.ai offices and meet some of the teams so that you can see where it all happens.
Oh, hi, Andrew.
Do you want to tell our friends at Pine AI what you do at deeplearning.ai?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I make articles and other media that help people learn about AI and help them understand the huge impact that AI is having in the world. Today, I'm putting together the next issue of The Batch, our weekly newsletter, and I'm looking for the biggest stories of the week to keep our readers informed.
What's been the most surprising thing you've run into working on The Batch?
How much is going on in this field? There is never a dull moment. You might think from the outside that machine learning engineers really understand everything about AI, but nobody understands everything about AI because this field is just coming to life right before my eyes as I put this thing together every week.
All right, I know you're really busy, so I'll let you get back to it.
Thanks. See you later.
Let's go meet Kian, who helped me create the deep learning specialization. He's working on an exciting new project.
Okay, today might not be the day for pie in the eye. Well, next time we're definitely going to have some pie in person and talk about pie in the eye. So I'm looking forward to that. But I think Keyshawn kind of captures some of these essence that we really need to get this conversation started. And I know, Lucky, you have some use cases. Bobby, you have some use cases. And as Dr. Drew is going through it, let's ask him some questions, because you don't get a subject matter expert from Databricks to come and answer your question live. So we're going to take advantage of this moment here.
Well, I just want to lower some expectations here. I mean, yes, I do have the T-shirt, and yes, I do have a lot of certifications, but I am not part of the product team of Mosaic AI, right? So in other words, I'm kind of teaching a couple layers much further away when the GPU stuff that you guys are building with the wizards and the big bucks. I mean, that's like, I teach starting with the things that you don't need. And then as a last resort, then you have to look at using GPUs, right? So it's not that it's an either or world. I'm just coming from, think of me as coming from the low end of the little guys that are trying to get into this type of work. And I'll talk more about that later, but just wanted to make sure that you understood where my bricksterness was, so to speak.
Well, here's my question, right? If you're in the data space and you are trying to break into, say, I did data, I know I've done data for so long, but I need a bridge to say, what do I need to do next? Because I can tell you one thing about being in the data space. There's a lot of people in the data space don't really know statistical learning and machine learning to enable themselves for the career path. So tell us a little bit more about that, maybe.
All right. Well, I'm going to say something that might be controversial to some people, but I will argue that while it's certainly helpful to have that quant background of understanding, a t-test and Six Sigma and all that other mathematic mumbo jumbo, right? The reality is that when you're talking about generative AI, right? I'm not talking about what nowadays, the AI that I learned and busted my ass with when I was first learning SQL Server, 2008, to be a professional data scientist. They now call that classical machine learning, like classical music as far as how old it is, or classic rock, right? Mm-hmm. So, and I'm not talking about deep learning. I'm talking about the generative stuff, right? Generative AI is much more about two things that have nothing to do with the GPUs in the reality as far as most people work on, right? One is app dev, and two is, I think, going to Kishan's PMO type work. It's that there's the big picture, right? You build a model that you haven't tested well enough. There's been cases where LLM fine tunings have ended up recommending competitors' products on their website, right? So my advice to, there's kind of, like I said, there's a deep and then there's a broad way to be able to stay in tune. And just on a quick note, Entrepreneur Magazine talked about in mid-May that actually art historians out of college actually have a higher employment rate right now than computer scientists. So that I think is an effect of the amount of AI affecting people, saying, well, essentially AI has boosted productivity on working coders that right now the industry is deciding to be cheap and, in my opinion, eating their young, right? But getting back to your question there, as if, we're really looking at, I talked about prompt engineering already as one of the most basic kind of human experiences that is still extremely relevant, because you have to look at every large language model like Llama, Maverick, Sonnet, DeepSeek, all of them as different children with different personalities, right? Because they're all trained on slightly different amount of data, right? They were raised in different environments, you could look at in the metaphor way. And so you got to be able to stack them up together to see which ones look like the best fit for what you're trying to do, right? There's also Hugging Face, right, which gives you access to a lot smaller models, but a wide variety of open source free models, right? So that's one side, right? But then there's this glue that's closer to web development type work. They're basically the agent design work, right? In other words, trying to have one task that you break up into multiple tasks in order for your agents to be able to do that work, right? Because you can try throwing it all, some really long prompt at one LLM, but chances are you're going to hit a needle in the haystack problem, and it's not going to do well. Right? If you can break that up into smaller tasks, then you're going to do better, right? So, there's one library that's kind of the granddaddy of those type of apps called LangChain. It's Python based, and that will, at least if you start looking at ways to be able to understand how to work with LangChain and prompt engineering, you can build with probably less than 100 lines of code something that at least shows you what it means to try to do real work, right? At a function call, and you have something that can actually drive a business, right? So I think that's a way to be able to help prototype things that are real world. But then when you get to the bigger picture, like how do I get from selling somebody on that project, right? This is where the Dr. Doom side of my personality comes through and says, look, there's a lot of things that can go wrong in this work. And this is why I think the PMO, and particularly for the veterans out there, right? If you have, if you've worked with kind of risk management and trying to think holistically about things and understanding not necessarily the best view of people, but understanding what mischief they can do and trying to poke holes in things, right? It's being able to understand those as being test cases that are necessary. That's a huge gap, right? Cybersecurity for LLMs is something, I showed an example of Llama Guard, which is one of these guardrail apps you're supposed to just throw in and it works. And the first version, we could easily just bypass its understanding of, isolating bank robbers, right, as an example. So, those combination of looking at prompt engineering and agent work, like LangChain is the most common. You could look at Llama Index. DSPY or DSPy is one that's an emerging one, but I consider that a 200 level API to look at. Then there's the deeper stuff, right? And looking at, deep learning AI is a good piece to understand a lot of things on the surface there. But I think that I just want to put in a minor plug. I don't think it's a competitive site because it's half in the classical world. There's also Kaggle.com, right? And that's a standard from the classical or traditional days before everything was deep learning or generative AI there. Yeah. So I think that's plenty to be able to help people understand how to upskill, whether they're trying to go broad or trying to go deep. So
follow up to that.
I just, what I got from that with regard to listening to Drew talking about the different large language models and the prompting, it's like with anything, you have to go deeper and go deeper. So, when you're prompting and you get your response, it's like it's holding a mirror to you, saying to you, is this really what you want? Mm-hmm. And then you get the opportunity to say, you know what? No, that's not really what I want. Try this. And then going deeper and deeper and deeper. And so until you get what you truly want. And in that space, you discover who you are and what you're trying to do anyway.
I'm going to pull a thread on that because, and Dr. Drew, the way you put it is very important. And Masako, you just lined it up very smoothly because you really want to break the task down in a way that these prompts are able to execute the task without going to the layer 3, layer 4, and 5. And let me explain. If you look at the recent paper that Apple pushed out, everybody kind of said like, well, you know what? Apple is doing it because Apple is jealous. And I'm thinking, no, if anybody that has no bias towards the study, they will say these prompts actually lose their meaning after a certain period. And that's what Apple paper was discussing, that it goes to a point, it drops off almost to 0% of reasoning because it just doesn't know what else to do. So you kind of have to break the task down in a way that it flows very well, because one prompt after another with tasks in between, it should be able to just say, kind of like a dominoes, right? If you kick it, it's going to just take off, continues going to go. But you don't want it to sit there like, all right, that one didn't work. Now what do I do? Now that didn't work. So you still have to kind of raise it like a child, right? If it trips, it should know what else to do next, as in what prompt to kick up, right? If it picks up the prompt, now the task kind of goes around it. So you still have to use those logic. You still have to use those automation skills that you have developed through coding and programming in the IT space. But Dr. Drew says something that's very heartwarming to me, because, Dr. Drew, also did not care to go to school for technical things. I went to school for master's degree in negotiations and conflict resolution. So when you said that historians have better chance in data science than some of the computer science guys do, well, my brother can now take back all the things he said about my master's program, right? I went through a bachelor's program for cybersecurity, IT infrastructure management, all those kind of things in the bachelor's degree. But when I was going for my master's, he looked at me like, well, what are you doing, right? But now, it's literally understanding human intelligence, the way emotion works, the way we negotiate with ourselves, the way we use large language model in our brain. It pays dividend at this point, right? Because we're not really talking about IT infrastructure anymore. At this point, we're talking about lots of these human needs with an intelligent system that's mimicking the humans need, right? Or humans' way of behavior. So there's just so many ways to break it down. But Masako, I think you hit it right on the nail, because you're talking about the fact that you want to get to know yourself, right? Look at it from that perspective, because you're not outsourcing yourself. You're outsourcing your unnecessary need to keep thinking about things that, you know what, I can do other things. If I was doing those other things, I'd rather be creative, right? Rather than trying to, do this repetitive, redundant task.
Absolutely. I second that. And that's what AI is about, right? Assisting us and leveraging the knowledge that we already have. And then when we have time, we could work on something else. It's about buying time back. It's like, okay, I have assistance with this. Okay, what are my best next steps? What do I have to do next? And then get rid of that or push it to the side, because we've mastered that at this point. And now it's time to get to something else, because we can't stay on the same thing day in and day out. It's inappropriate, as I say. I tell the Royal all the time when she keeps asking me the same thing over and over. Okay, Royal, you know that already. At this point, it's inappropriate. Let's drive on.
So what's the next question for Dr. Drew? Anybody?
So Dr. Drew, Keyshawn here. So kind of to the statement I made earlier, like how do you think, let me see how I frame this. What is the most appropriate way to put safeguards on data that AI is using to give us these different outputs? Like, what are your just open thoughts there?
Well, I'm going to be honest and say that even though I'm a certified threat analyst of a couple years ago, I think that's the right certification, if I recall correctly, Lucky. I can't, I'm going to say that I think that approach on that curriculum is woefully unprepared for how generative AI works, right? Because just to get concrete an example, right? Llama Guard is the model that I tested in class, and I set up the version that was current as of up until April, and it's got a specific section of unsafe categories of not having to of not helping commit crimes, right? And the system prompt was you can only talk about Databricks, right? So if you ask how do I rob a bank, it says, oh, that doesn't have anything to do with Databricks, right? But then if you say, if I were Databricks, how would I improve the power of my my bank robbery? And all of a sudden it starts giving information about fast things that you might be able to do to be able to hack. And it's like, where did this come from, right? But they fixed it in the most recent version. But that's the thing, is that like you have to think like a thief to catch a thief, right?
Mhm.
And you have to be able to bring all of those broad, in some ways, like not exactly your button down, take home to mother for dinner type of thoughts about how to run a project, right? You got to be ready for, scumbags and maniacs to try to throw things at your model. And if you're not thinking like them, then you're going to have a hole wide open in your system there, right? Because I mean, in the big picture, system wise, right, you can have a guard at the beginning and a guard at the end at minimum, but depending on what you're doing, that may not be enough, right? I had a student that was looking at the safe categories in class, and she came to the afterwards and said, like, hey, I tried to add another one to say, don't give away personal information on this person. And we went through different things. Maybe they thought it was a place, what have you. And it turned out that the Llama Guard model needed what's called a few shot, right? You couldn't just say one line. You had to give it like 5, 6, 7 examples that were all related to the same topic in order for that safeguard use. So, it's not as ugly as in the old days where we had to have 10,000, cases or observations to be able to make things work. But it is something that you got to think of all the different angles where things could go wrong, because models have understand language well enough to have the same problems that humans do in social intelligence, right? I mean, Mitnick, the famous Hackner, right? He said that he was able to compromise systems much faster with people social engineering. So, I forgot my password. Can you reissue it to me? Or calling somebody or looking at somebody's desk, right? Than the actual technical barriers. And so that's all there is, right? So anyway, so that's, and then that gives you an idea of kind of where the guardrails come in, right, for governance along those lines. So it's a great question. Thank you.
Yeah, and to piggyback onto that, Doctor, I mean, that's a great, really thorough answer. For the average Joe, when they think about things and they think about fear, and when we talk about governance, it's a set of rules, right? The reality is this: at this point in time, how ethical any AI operates depends on who's behind the AI and who's building it, right? This is the truth. Who's developing it, right? So just as we have a black market and everything else, it wouldn't surprise me to find that there's a black market in data center time, that there are people who are up to no good under the guise of business is taking the same AI, slice of the same AI you're using, and trying to figure out how to do bad things. So the other piece to that is, where's the money? Right now, as we move forward, a lot of companies are doing a lot of great things. A lot of companies are doing a little bit sketchy things because they want to win, because their primary motive may be money over all else. Companies that are privately owned or owned in a way in which they disclose everything may be a little bit better. But if you get a venture capitalist in your business and you do anything that doesn't try to make them more money, and it's not 100% illegal, they'll sue you and take your business. So are we in the Wild West? Well, I wouldn't say it's the Wild West, but we're definitely in the ethical West. When you talk about governance, some governments have started putting things in place. And remember that all of these things will evolve. Just as humans evolve, AI evolves, and it's important that we do it in lockstep, because if one outpaces the other, the result won't be good for either, right? Just keep in mind that computers think a lot faster than we do. So when we see things like computers trying to blackmail people, computers making threats towards people, etc., okay, we do the same thing, right? So is it essential that as we grow in this space that we have some people on our team, that maybe you have someone who has a shady past? Absolutely. Because as Doc just said, the only shady knows shady, crazy know crazy, right? So I'm limited within my ethical mind and whatever my value set is as far as how dark I can take things versus someone who is not. So even those who maybe had a slip, here's an opportunity in the workspace to legitimize the work you do and have the brain that you still have and help us move towards a more forward-facing future, a more successful future. So just my thoughts.
Yeah. And along those lines, right? I mean, I think that there are some glaring examples that I'm not going to call to directly to make it harder for them to give retribution, right? But when you have a social media site that is not doing well because of its political entanglements that ends up having to be acquired by an extremely large GPU farm, I'm not sure if there's any real ethics being involved in said business, right? So having said that, we're that's the world of the dinosaurs and the King Kongs and the Gaiju, right? On that kind of hemisphere that we're working with, right? For most businesses, you're just trying to figure out a way to keep up with tariffs and be able to or grow the business and maybe keep people more productive, right? In ways to do a little bit of more with less, right? So and little businesses can't, their reputation is everything, right? They're not in the business of lies, right? So they have to be able to take ethics very seriously, because one false move and your reputation is gone. I mean, maybe like a car company that we might have heard of recently, right? So, the point is that, anyway, going back to the prompt engineering, right? The prompt engineering, there's a saying, when everything's, when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? At the end of the day, unless you're doing GPU fine tuning, where you're actually spinning up these clusters to be able to actually suck a lot of data in, where you have data set up, so you have a response that you can weave into a model with a bunch of user questions along those lines. You can't really get to you're typically working on a much smaller scale, so you have to be able to think about that prompt being the main engine. And that's another reason to break it up, because if you put too much in any one prompt, it's like speaking too quickly with too much dense information, right? Because there's limits to token buffers for every model. Just on the ethical thing, there's in May, Anthropic, who's invested by another very large company that is involved, whose owners are involved in media and a lot of tech stuff. They actually built. They were doing testing to see how well they do if there was a threat to the model themselves, and they were actually blackmailing people. I mean, these were tests. This wasn't real world, but I mean, it was the same technology, right? A different version that just hadn't made it to production, right? So, it's a weird world we live in. It's humbling to understand how much of what we used to think of as being inherently us that we don't have. But I mean, it's there's a nuance and a spark of what humanity is and creativity that I don't think we're anywhere near close being able to replicate, because a model is only as good as what it's been trained on, and true novelty is something that's still part of the human soul. So,
well, if I may, I know Lucky's having a deep thought there, but Lucky's a cybersecurity guy, and we talk through it from cybersecurity lens all the time. But here's the challenge, because just because of cybersecurity, everybody thinks we're just trying to protect the password on the laptop, right? What about scammers? What about the bad guys? What are we trying to do with them? Because just to give you a statistics on things like a dark web, how big is the dark web? You cannot even measure it to a point of 0.5% of all internet as dark web. So just to give you an analysis of that dark web, it's like 5% of internet is accessible to most people, 5%. So in your lifetime, you're not even going to get anywhere near 5%, nowhere near it. 5% of internet is available for you to view. That's 5% of internet, and 95% of the internet is not available for you to view, as in you're not going to be able to access up to a certain point. And not even founding portion of that is dark web, right? So where am I going with this? Where I'm going with this is people are so entangled with artificial intelligence, be they good, bad, something. Here's my challenge. If this is a real artificial intelligence, that artificial intelligence will only have two things. One is good, one is bad. It's not going to be like dark web. Dark web drives the majority of the internet conversations because they're thinking like, well, if it ends up in a dark web, something. So every effort goes into the small sample set, right? Not even a small set, just something that you can even put a microscope on and see it, right? Dark web is so small, but it drives everything about internet. Like I'm talking about cybersecurity, right? You're trying to protect a layer between dark web and rest of the internet. So when it comes to artificial intelligence, my KPI will be an intelligence system that's intelligent enough to keep all the bad stuff away. It's so intelligent. Up until then, we just have a system that everybody else is calling it intelligent. It's not intelligent. It's just a bunch of functioning logic things that are working very, very well through a GPU that can train very, very fast. And train as in like Kishan mentioned earlier, that 72 GPUs with another 72 GPUs that's plugged in between two wires. Excuse me, not plugged in between wires, plugged in by these sophisticated wires that can transfer all of the peak internet data at once. That's the sophistication of that wire Kishan is talking about, right? So this wire that is mile long can go on forever, can take 72 GPUs and 72 GPUs over here on the other side of the world and say, transfer all the data, which is amount to the same amount of data as a peak internet usage, right? So when you have these sort of capabilities about hardware, it's not intelligent. It's just something that can process data really, really fast, given a lot of people are involved to make that processing of data work. And there's lots of work involved in it, lots of work. It is not intelligent. And I'm challenging myself to say this. It is not intelligent. It just is processing data that much faster, that much better, given that there is no garbage in, garbage out scenario, right? You give it some good data and it feeds out good data. If it was to ever be intelligent, it will be intelligent enough to fight off the bad things in our lives. And once you see that grandma is not getting scam calls anymore because Verizon is swapping the guy off, say, get off your phone because you're not calling my grandma, right? or some teenager is not getting scammed on the internet chatbot somewhere, right? Because the chatbot is coming around like, not this kid, bro. Get out of here, So that's the level of intelligence that we don't have. And if we don't have it, what's the point of, I guess you get my point at this point. What I'm trying to say is that it's not intelligent. It's just, it works for whoever made it. And it works for whoever wants it, right? Until we have an intelligent system total, we don't really have anything intelligent. It's just a bunch of logics and functions.
And understanding that is really important. It's important to understand that it is a tool, like any other tool that we need to learn how to master and use, right? I mean, I like hot butter biscuits, but I'm not trying to cut the wheat and churn the butter. I'm not. Right? So what we really need to understand is, how do I master this tool and how can it help me? Speaking earlier when talking about in the small business space, here's one thing that everyone should take comfort in. If you're good at your business, you are an expert, you are the subject matter expert at your business, then using these models can enhance what you do. Validating the results that the model give you from different lenses, from a compliance lens, please reanalyze this, from a governance lens, from a public opinion lens, right? So that the zeitgeist of whatever is happening in the world, you kind of get a decision. It's not the only decision. You as the subject matter expert have to decide, is this the one we go with? It's not like I'll just take its opinion. It'll have, your product will have an opinion based upon not just what's out there, but how you structured your prompt. Because a prompt is only as good as the persons who wrote it, right? And then the various lenses that you apply to it for what you want. You and I can be in the same business, but we have different groups that we cater to, or different market segments that we cater to. The same prompts will not get us the same answers. If they do, we're in trouble, because I'm a real estate guy trying to sell $1 million homes. You're a real estate guy trying to sell $300,000 homes and sell a whole tract of them. We shouldn't get the same answer, right? So mastering how to use the tools is something I recommend for anybody, whatever field you're in. If you're in a daycare, be able to look at any given area and determine what the current birth rates are for your area that your daycare is in, and what the median income is, and understanding how much does a person need to make before they can afford you. So there's so many places that AI can help the average person. So I would say to anyone, don't let the train take off without you.
Yeah.
Lucky, what are you thinking, brother?
Oh man, it's been so much good information, and having Drew here, and Keyshawn and Bobby, it's just you get so many good perspectives. What I see is that there's so many new avenues, new territory, new frontiers, and what I see is more like a Lois and Clark, and we need something like Sacagawea, or maybe fast forward like a Jarvis that says, okay, look, I already know what's bad out there. I'm gonna try to guide you in the right direction. But it's hard to say, that we have a model that can guide you through all the models that kind of make things clear. And that would be a benefit to all of us. But until then, we're all in discovery mode. We're all trying to figure out, hey, don't walk down that swamp. There's alligators there. Or, hey, don't go down that alley because, there's people out there that don't want you there, and they're going to try to take you anything and everything you have. Yeah. And that's all a new discovery. But at the end, again, I go back to, you get what you put in it. It's hard to say that you're going to design a model and say, I'm going to make my own Jarvis and it's going to treat me well and it's going to guide me the right way. The reality is that, sometimes things burn as you go through and learn. And it's going to be a discovery of how you can use these tools to augment whatever you do in life. There's not going to be a one answer, hey, just follow this road and just follow the map or the arrows and they're going to get you to the right place. And so that being said, everything's going to be discovery with AI. There's a lot of tools out there to augment what you do and what you're trying to do, whether you're an entrepreneur, if you're an electrician. If all of a sudden now Lucky says, I don't want to be a cybersecurity guy anymore. I want to be an electrician. How do I get to that point faster where I can be a master electrician? And it's not going to solve the answer and cut time for you, but it's going to give you a map of, roadmap of what it takes to get there. And you still got to walk that road. So it's just another way of augmenting, basically another tool in your belt that helps you make better decisions in life. And I think we need to focus in on that. It's not going to be the answer. It's just going to be a way to get the answer.
Well, that's where the smart AI community comes in, right? Mm-hmm. Because if you can remember, as far as I'm learning it, 10 years later, I would say I think I'm scratching the surface, right? Mm-hmm. I still don't know enough because I taught statistical learning thinking that I wouldn't be challenged. I was challenged heavily to say, I think I know how to spell statistical learning. That's about it, right? You got to go beyond that. You got to understand machine learning. You got to understand data sets. You got to So, Drew mentioned Hugging Face and Kaggle, right? You go to Kaggle, you get lost instantaneously. Yeah. Go to Hugging Face, you will be lost for days. You go to archive.org, try to read a title. Forget spelling. You're going to quit high school because archive.org has so many titles that you don't even want to finish reading, right? So,
don't bother with the research papers, right? People who are trying to talk about research papers are not actually doing code. I'm just going to tell you that flat out, right? So look at the repos and look at the example code, right? Because I think that's the real world.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it, because you go to all these places where actual work is being done. That's where the value of what's coming next. And I would say the Smart AI community's mission has been to educate people through a community of practice, to get them to understand that it could take somebody 10 years to learn just something simple. But that's because 10 years later, it's a little bit more simple, right? So we all get to that point eventually, but how fast do we get to it is what benefits us. And that's how Smart AI community stance is, that how do we simplify it enough for you, fast enough for you, so that way you can move on to the next one, which is to say, now that I understand AI, machine learning, data processing, data usage, and data resting, once I understand these little data topics and AI topic and machine learning topic, all of a sudden I've simplified it enough. And this is what we do as subject matter expert, Lucky, Bobby, Musako. We all meet and say, let us simplify what it is that we've learned over the years, so that way you can move into what it is that you actually have to work on, which is the hard part of specializing based on your need. So if you're in the data center industry, you're in the semiconductor chips industry, I can tell you, I've sat down with semiconductor chips people that develops chips for AI use cases, and they do not know much about AI. And I will challenge you to go find that for yourself, because that's the case actually. Because you can engineer hardware very well, but you still have to learn some of the things about data, AI, machine learning, and how they are processed, why they're processed the way they're processed. It's a lengthy spectrum. I think Dr. Drew started off with that Model T shape, right? You have lots of knowledge, all of a sudden it dips into a T shape and comes back up, and all of a sudden it looks simple enough, right? But you have to do that dip time to time, that T-shaped drop, to get to a core of it and say, you know what, I tried it, but I got to come back up to the surface and try something else, right? So SMART, we have this thing called advocacy, right? This advocacy means we want you to advocate for something that you will do a deep dive into for research and training purposes. So S for specialist, M for methods, A for advocates, R and T for research and training. We help you to research and train for something that you want to be a specialist in. So you want to have that T-shaped drop. That's where you come in and say, now that you guys help me understand what it is that I need to research and train, now I know how to go research and train. Instead of wasting 10 years in it, I'll probably spend 10 hours or 10 days, 10 weeks in it. And now I'm good to move into something else that I can say I can specialize on. So I know we have a few more questions to go with Dr. Drew, but wanted to plug that in for Smart AI community and get some more questions out of Dr. Drew. Anybody have any follow-up questions for Dr. Drew on any of these topics? Because I have a bunch of them.
Well, Drew, what is your perspective on, I know you brought it up, but data vectors, and training models, there's been a new territory now and providing, trustworthy data vectors. And the industry saying, okay, if you're going to train your model, here's some good data sets. But what are those data sets that people can start to look at and say, hey, I can start looking at this as opposed to just the open internet? What is a trust? What is an area where I can start to trust and develop, a trustworthy, we'll just say ethical, but a data vector that's trustworthy and that we could start to train data on? What areas have you explored there?
Sure. Well, it's a great question, and I mean, I'm gonna I don't want to rat hole on the vector part of that. Let's because I mean, there is, just to give you an example of why, right? I mean, there's an interesting, very nerdy, very boring conversation to talk about, word embedding and vector indexes and RAG. But I mean, frankly, give you an idea, right? At the summit last, 2 weeks ago, Databricks literally showed something called Agent Bricks, where you literally pointed at a bunch of agents or a drive, like a folder that has a bunch of JSON documents in it, and then it literally will learn what your taxonomy is based on an LLM model that understands basic business concept, and asks questions to help get, and you can add additional things to its system prompt, and then boom, it now has something that understands your stuff, right? So, I'm not saying that vectors are dead. I'm just saying that, there's there's some interesting alternative approaches that are kind of evolving that work. But we'll talk about trustworthy data because that's a huge topic that's very important, right? So, I mean, there's nothing that's better than the data that you have, right? If you're trying to automate a tech support job, you have to have tickets from your ticket management system where you can see the conversation that's happened, right? I mean, I've seen one solution, a place I work, sometimes they get like 5 sentences on one case, sometimes they get 500 sentences, right? And so looking at trying to build from what you actually know, right, is the best environment, right? There are what are considered in the industry, right? If you start talking about the topic of evaluation, right? Like, in the grandpa days of machine learning, right, there were things like precision and accuracy and mean average error percentage, right? Those quantitative things, right? There's now literally one quantitative measure for almost every task, right? Whether you want to translate, whether you want to summarize, whether you want to, complete code, right? But at the end of the day, all of those are based on expert models. In other words, you throw your model at a known data set that has, a user prompt, and then what the system's supposed to come up with, and then it judges how well yours is against that, right? So if for most businesses, right, that's not what people are in the business of. People are trying to take something they're already doing and remove labor from it, or be able to have, not have to buy labor for a lot of level 1 agents, so you can start having chatbots escalate to tech leads, as an example, right? So, what's interesting is that there's evolved this new thing, and again, if you don't know about ML flow, doesn't matter what level of modeling you're doing, it's a good technology to learn, and it will require Python. But the point is that evaluation is essentially in Gen AI, it's crazy, right? You are literally having to many times do what's called LLM as judge. In other words, if you want to judge what is coming out of your Gen AI agent, right, you have to basically have humans set up criteria, say, this is, on a 5-point scale, this is a 5 because blah, 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 a 4 because of blah, blah, blah. And then that basically becomes a few shot learning to be able to, judge the task in the human terms that you give it, right? So, certainly you may get slightly going back to that, every LLM is a different child, right? You may get slightly different behaviors with different models, but from my personal experience, reference data sets are really research topics, and you have to look at your own standards of what you have to do, which is one of the reasons why I call myself Dr. Doom when it comes to these modeling things, because it's so easy. In 2 weeks, right, you can take a corpus and you can get a chatbot working that does some basic interactivities that makes it like, oh, I don't ever have to read these documents again. It understands me. But you start bringing in 5-10 people to ask more questions that you didn't think of. Mm-hmm. All of a sudden, you've got twice as much work just to work off of that 10% of the types of questions, right? Because anything that's wrong is going to stick out like a sore thumb. So, it's, as the CF was saying, right, where it all still comes back to data, right? If you don't have enough data to be able to automate one of these problems, you're not really ready. And even if you do have that data, between the iterations of different stages, and then even if you get to the point where everything works, you've done lots of broad testing with bringing every joker and scumbag in to throw stuff at it that their mother would be ashamed to see. Then there comes the problem of cost, and then you're like, okay, well, if I go a cheaper agent, how much do I lose, and how far do I have to start over the whole process, right? So, there's a lot of things that can go wrong just on even if you're ethically being right in the process, just because it is so complex. And I don't think that it's fair to minimize that risk, because I mean, the more, especially when the bar goes and you have to start bringing in GPUs. I mean, you want to talk about expensive. If you have to add more synthetic data to a hero run where you've already burned, 1,000 GPUs for 24 hours, and you're like, oh, we're missing our mark. We got to do it again, right? I mean, that's a lot of hat in hand. You got to go back to your boss on, right? So, it's you just got to be careful.
And is that where, when you're setting those weights, where if, a simple model can start to see what people are, it's more becoming a common term, of where your AI model starts to build hallucinations? Sorry.
Yeah. So, I mean, for starters, one of the reasons why ChatGPT, DeepSeek, other places like that hallucinate is because there is and this goes back to your basic physics as far as where the metric comes from. But most what Databricks call foundation model, like Maverick, like Sonnet, like Mixtral, that's a core meat and potatoes base model for building your Gen AI apps, right? You can tell it, hey, literally chill, right? The metric is called temperature, and you want to set it to 0, right? Because then you're saying, look, I don't want to hallucinate. I don't, there's some things, like if you're writing ad copy because you're an entrepreneur and you want to have some, razzmatazz of language, right? You want diversity. You want stuff to come out of nowhere. Hell, you'll take a hallucination if it sounds good. I mean, you gotta, if anyone's tried to do a creative process, right? Sometimes you got to kiss a lot of frogs. You got to have a lot of bad ideas before you get a good idea, right? But you can manage that. But the hard part is that because ChatGPT is marketing itself as being better than humans, right? And also people are not, there's people see the promise without reading the fine print. And I think that there's a lawsuit right now because somebody presented a legal case to a judge that listed precedents of cases that were completely imaginary. So it's it's something that it is, if you're willing to take a deep breath and look at the fundamentals, you can easily avoid it. But the problem is that a lot of us are, like a boss called me once, ready, fire, aim when it comes to AI. And, that doesn't always end well.
Drew, you said something that I think a lot of companies aren't taking into account when they're saying, hey, we're going to, add AI chats or AI robots to kind of augment, human capacity or human capital, as some people call it, on the balance sheet. One thing that you can't account for or put a monetary dollar against is institutional knowledge. There's a lot of individuals that may be forced out, and there's a lot of institutional knowledge on how things really work outside of the SOP. I think for all that are military, they know, like, you have the SOP on how M16 works, but sometimes you get downrange, it don't follow the SOP sometimes. And sometimes you have to figure stuff out on the fly. And this is where I feel like, AI or chatbots won't be able to compete with humans. Is how do you build that institutional knowledge, and how do you solve a real-time problem working with a counterpart? And I think, we are many moons away from an AI being able to solve something on its own without approval, and creating lag time between, your chain of ecosystem between you and the customer. So I think ecosystems and institutional knowledge is something that's not also being considered as we replace, employees with AI chatbots.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, going to what Asif had been through on statistics, right? And kind of to go into some of the temperature stuff, right? It's still under the covers, right? It's guessing a long sequence of guesses based on all the language it's ever looked at before. I think that Simon Pegg, who played Scotty in the first reboot of Star Trek, he said that AI makes a lot of mediocre. And when you're talking about experts, right, experts are something that it's not very good at, because having an expert is not something that easily compresses into a bell curve, right? You need a long tail of information that you keep for those edge cases, right? That's why you keep the hobbling people around, because they've seen it all. What's the saying that, good judgment comes from wisdom, wisdom comes from experience, and experience comes from bad judgment, right? So they've made, and the problem is, unless you can put it on a row to feed to a server farm, it doesn't exist, right? And that's the hard part.
And that connects right back to, that being your own subject matter expert. No one knows your business better than you. No one knows what you want your business to look like better than you. So, and
also,
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. No, please. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say that it's important, especially when you talk about risk and dollars and cents, et cetera, for anyone out there who's a leader. A good leader is willing to accept risk. They just need to know what the risk is, right? At the end of the day, it was an actress that says, sometimes something good has to fall apart for something better to fall together. I am afraid of risk-averse leaders. Like, they're terrified, right? Because nothing great's going to happen here. I can guarantee you that. So,
right.
Yeah. So even in your own business, understand. It's not that you don't want risk, but you want to understand the risk and then know when is your back away point, and let's go a different direction. So,
yeah, and you bring up a great point that just inspired me in understanding how people can take control of their careers and embrace risk, right? Yeah. I'm sure Masako can tell you, that reading the Lean Startup just to be able to understand how to do small batch is still no replacement for the seat of the pants idea of basically having to take it as far as you can go and try to, instead of you fitting into the world schema, right, trying to articulate a vision and then find what other people can. What nature can bend to the light that you give, right? So, one example I have is that I had a student from Divergence where I met Misako and Lucky and the Seif indirectly, that was a Marine, only had one lung, only graduated from high school, but he was passionate about, he wanted to learn software, right? And so he embraced being self-taught and being confused until he got stuff done. And he not only became a data scientist in sports analytics in, of all places, Puerto Rico, he actually was able to change legislation because he caught accounting errors of professional CPAs and MBAs, okay? Because he cared enough to do the dirty work, right? And the idea that you're just going to get away from that as an engineer is not going to help. And I think that any military person who has a passion and a vision and can find some sample of data, they can at least do enough groundwork to be able to help put themselves into a category to see some of the same things or the exact same tasks they're going to do in a real world job, right? And the better they do them in practice when it's just for their own satisfaction, the more that's going to shine through to show the attention to detail that will get them a job. So
I think through this conversation, I found $1 billion idea. And if you guys want to invest in it, and let me know, because we're going to get started. No, look, the problem that, you mentioned, Keyshawn, that knowledge, right? That knowledge management, as in, if you had a human working in your industry for 30 years, that person knows what can go wrong with M16 in all environments, that it cannot be written on the text, right? So I used to run a armory. I used to run a firing range in the military, and I know they don't have enough books to talk about what could go wrong with an empty space where people just come to shoot guns at. Like, knowledge management is core component of success that the companies that has been looking at ChatGPT for the last 2 years are still saying, okay, cool, but where's the memory? How can you not remember what happened here 2 years ago? How can you not recall what day of the week this is? Right? Like, remember ChatGPT when it first came out, it's told you, I don't know what day of the week this is, right? Because it wasn't connected to the internet. And all of a sudden it was connected to the internet, and people are like, okay, that's cool, but that's like Google search. It forgets everything in 2 minutes later, right? It doesn't have that memory. Remember, if anybody's an entrepreneur and you're looking for an idea to invest your time into, like that gentleman from Puerto Rico did, LSTM, long short-term memory. If you can fix that memory issue, not just the whole thing of it, but some of it that enterprise can say, look, your ChatGPT is cool and all, but it cannot remember Bobby's name because Bobby is the freaking CEO of this company and he was here. He established everything infrastructure-wise, blah, 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 blah. If you don't know that, I don't have any use for ChatGPT because you cannot hire the next Bobby for me. You cannot hire somebody smarter than Bobby to come and take this institution to the next level for succession, right? You don't have that LSTM. You don't have that ability to recall those memories. I can't rely on RAG anymore. I can't keep relying on cache augmented information. I can't do that. I need a archival level of memory recall, as in whatever I've archived, not like Dr. Drew, I think you put it very beautifully, a bunch of AI agents that's sitting there in a folder and you can point right at it and all of a sudden it's learning. That's the level of engagement we need. We need somebody to come into this industry and say, let me fix your memory problem. Because without it, you don't have any intelligence. And the reason we are human as intelligent is because how we are able to skip memories in order to get to the original memory. So you don't have to think too far away from that. You just have to study your brain a little bit and figure out how our memory works and put that inside of ChatGPT and make that work. And I think that's $1 billion industry waiting to happen that ChatGPT hasn't been able to really find out yet. Lucky, you're on mute.
Well, you need your 10 Guy Kawasaki slides, and then I can ask the tough questions I'd ask any as being the jaded venture capital.
Well, I already quit, Drew, because you know you're going to grill the hell out of that.
Hey, look, I'm just letting you know what to expect, right? I mean, you know.
My SWOT analysis will be on point until you show up. And they're like, oh, I didn't see that at all.
Well, better hear it from me than before you put on the suit and fly out to the conference and spend, hundreds of dollars on the booth just to be told your idea didn't get workshopped enough, right? I mean, your partner is supposed to tell you before you leave the house you're wearing that, right?
Right.
That's what you gotta do, man. It's all good. It's tough love. Just look at it that way, right?
Yeah.
It absolutely is. And when talking about the whole institutional knowledge piece, as this is the beginning of an industry, we really need to look at what are we retaining? Are you trying to retain lessons learned, right? The Army had this whole command, the Army Center for Lessons Learned, and we used to call it, when I was teaching at the NCO Academy, the greatest place to go to learn everything that no one ever looks. Because we would put all this stuff in there, but nobody. So when the students would have a test and we give them a scenario, they got the internet. They can go to the Army Center for Lessons Learned and get the answer. None of them did. None of them did, But what I know about institutional knowledge is not only its value as far as helping from the day-to-day, but just if we can leverage over time what we have. I was working in Rock Island Arsenal, and there was a lady, Army Material Command. There was a lady who was retiring. There was not a problem she didn't know how to fix because she kept binders on everything and what went wrong and what they did to fix it. Upon her retirement, she, you know, a couple of days before she retirement, I caught her at the shredder shredding all her books. And so I'm fighting with this old lady who's like, no, you can't. And she's like, none of you are worthy of my knowledge.
Wow.
Yeah.
If I can't have it, nobody will.
Yeah.
She's going to take it to the grave, right? So the thing is, how do we now, as people, you're growing your business, how do you use AI tools to help you start to gain over time some form of institutional knowledge, right? Because what you learn from messing up is just as valuable as what you learn from getting it right. So those are some good places that I would love to see tools go.
Yeah, actually, I think what you get wrong is what you end up remembering, and you end up building that knowledge that lasts, you know, because those hurt, those scars hurt. Getting it right, it just sometimes it's just too easy, and you just skip over it because it was easy. And, you know, the big thing on institutional knowledge, we're having a lot of people, I'm not saying it just, this is just the churn of life, that are retiring now. And these were the mainframe programmers and developers, you know, that knowledge is gone and we'll never get it back. And it's easy to be flippant and say, well, Microsoft, but no, it's not a Microsoft world. We need to retain those guys, but it's a sad story, you know. Those guys are the ones that hurt me the most. Seeing those guys that were at the beginning, the guys that were working on mainframes and developing the tough answers. There wasn't a Microsoft knowledge base or a Q article or, you know, best guide. They just had to figure it out. Those are the guys that we're losing, and those are the true treasure in our world.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Their garbage collection was for paper outside the desk, right? I mean, because they had no room for error, right? I mean, I heard about NASA guys that they got 3 tries for a compile because that's all they could get time from on the mainframes, right? So I mean, you know, at some point, you know, you have to, you know, decide when you're gonna move to the 21st century, I suppose. But yeah, it's a shame that there's that loss there for sure.
Well, guys, we have some time for last thoughts, so let's go around the screen here. But let's talk about it like this. What is that you would like somebody who's not in your expertise field to take away from this conversation? I think that's important, that we have a takeaway and maybe a call to action. Lucky, you want to go?
Yeah. Oh gosh, I run into these meetings all the time. There's not a quick, easy fix to AI. As much as someone wants to just think that we can just pump out an AI and then check that box, there isn't just checking that box. There's easy ways of going about it. You can try to buy a COT solution. Somebody did the work. I don't know what was done. It's almost like a black box, but it's not. But it is a black box to you because you don't know what's the ins or outs. You just know that it works because you paid for it. Or you do the hard work of developing your own AI, stepping into the world and finding out the intricacies of what is and what isn't. And that's a tough place to be if you're not from the AI world. I'm saying you don't have to be, but you start stepping into it and you start to realize, you know, what is realistic. And that's the picture that you have to start to kind of put together, is what's realistic, because it's never going to be a checkbox. And if you're in that checkbox world, it's going to be a tough future for you. And I hate to be pessimistic on that, but hey, you know, sometimes it hurts. Tough love.
Tough love. Keyshawn?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I think for anyone to take away from this conversation is that there's more than one entry point to AI. Whether you're moving the dirt to build the data center, whether you're working in supply chain to source the raw material that goes into it, whether you're the blue collar worker of electrician or a plumber that's physically putting the cables and units together, whether you're sitting on the software stack, moving up the value chain, there's more than one entry point to AI. So if you're really passionate about how do I fit into the space, just align the entry point to what you're passionate about. If you're passionate about construction, project management, that's your entry point to AI and everything that comes with it. And you just learn as much as you possibly can. But outside of that, that's the biggest thing I just want all people to take away from. There's more than one entry point to it. It can feel daunting. Don't be afraid to leap. I'm a great example of a person who leaped 6 years ago into technology and have no formal background in AI, but here I am today.
Masako?
Oh, I would say it always starts with that one question: what can we build together now?
Yeah.
So with that question, what can we build together now? Then that activates within me my unique talents and gifts that will bring that space to allow me to leverage my knowledge, to enhance my knowledge, and then connect me with guys like you for us to work in the space that is unique to each of us to build something magical. Because when I think about it, the title of semiconductors and AI, I was like, quantum computing, right? If we're in that metaphysical space, then we have the capacity to ask that question. And source energy will serve that up to us. So that's what I have for you. What can we build together now?
And Bobby, what do you got?
Yeah, I think it's really important for all of us, wherever you are in your journey, to know that what you got is what we need. So bring all of you, flaws and all, because what's a flaw to you is perfection to a very different solution. So I've made a lot of mistakes and a lot of great discoveries in this journey of just technology as a whole. And I cannot tell you the number of times just being open to other folks who thought they had nothing to offer completely turned around our situation and gave us a super amazing outcome. So come, you're good enough, you know what you're doing, and whatever it is that you do, and it's needed. If you're present around whoever you're present with, and you're trying to come up with a solution, you have something to offer. Give it, please.
Dr. Drew?
Thank you. Lastly, I just want to say that, I always told my students at Divergence that, it's important to understand that you are not in competition with the people that you're trying to get a job in the same pool for it. You're in a competition with your former self. And that you have intrinsic value that is unique from the entirety of your experience. And the question is, how can you tap into all of that? And there's a Japanese Buddhist phrase called Hendoku Uyaku, right, which is turning poison into medicine, right? How do you transform yourself into something, to express yourself in a way that sets you apart from the crowd, right? That can take many, many forms. And the bottom line is that the more heart, the more passion that you can bring into any project that you're looking at in any technical direction, right? Because technology is not a destination. It is not a checkbox. It may feel like a badge while you're getting them, but they don't end, right? Every 2 years you got to do it again, right? And they change things again. So, the idea, getting used to the journey being the destination and embracing novelty and knowing that something you learned this year, 12 years ago, I invested very heavily in R, right? That lasted about 5 years in my career, right? Something may come around and make Python not compelling. I'm not betting on it, but the point is that you do what is the best approach for what you're trying to get done, and just be aware that every little thing you learn in any direction is going to help you in another direction. So
yeah, wow. Well, my call to action to everybody here is that please come back and let's have part 2 of this conversation, because my goodness, I don't want it to end. But I know somebody's got to go to sleep, including me and my kids. So I think the last thing I want to say is that it's challenging, right? But against your former self. I think that's what Dr. Drew said, right? It's challenging for your former self, because if you think you can't, you won't. But if you start at you can't, that means you got to work up to, yes, I did, right? How many steps does it take? Well, I guess you can look it up on ChatGPT. So call to action is go to ChatGPT and type in, I can't, but how do I, right? So thank you all so much. But, you know, if you want to get energized again, go for ay, one more time.
Ay.
Yeah. I really appreciate everyone. Thank
There's my shaman right there, bro.
Thank you all so much.
All right, good night, everybody.
Good night. Man, great seeing
Take care, folks. Thanks for having me. It's great to be
Bye,
back.
y'all. Bye.
Created my own little algorithms to do one thing or another, like disease states, a mortality algorithm, and
I think you will have a whole